Good morning and afternoon, our merry Marvelites, wherever you might be. Welcome to a very special Marvel movie talk. Very excited to have our guests here. As always, I'm Christian Blatt, joined in a stunning X-Men hat by Michael Shirley.
Yeah, I've totally got a really good one on today.
I love the Colossus in there. And special guests, Julia and Eric Lewald, who are, of course, from the X-Men the Animated Series, but also responsible for this great book that I'm holding, they're holding. Michael got left out, I'm sorry. But also a shout out to the great back cover because, look, here's the bad guys, Omega Red, Apocalypse. So Eric and Julia, it's lovely to get to speak to you again. Oddly enough, we spoke back in January at the AfterBuzz Studios, which no one's been in since mid-March. But I'm glad we got that interview in when we did. And as I was saying beforehand, it's been a long 10 years since January.
Who are you again?
Yeah, exactly. Believe me, that's what my wife asked this morning. Look, there's it's always good to have some bright spots in a year that might be challenging. The way this one is kind of an unprecedented challenge. And what I love, because I follow the both of you on social media, but also there's the @XmenTAS account, just how often every day dozens of people I'm so glad that Disney Plus has X-Men the Animated Series, and how many people that series was so important to in the, what is it now, 28 years since it premiered?
Yeah, almost to the day.
Yeah.
28 years ago on Halloween.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how that can be because I'm only 18.
Same here, and I wrote for it. So
and I'm only 21, so I don't understand it at all. So, well, I want to talk about the book in particular, but I think a great place is to start is something that I think people will be interested in is how you got involved in the project and what your familiarity was with these characters before you actually started doing the show.
Funny you should ask. If we're talking going in the Wayback Machine to 1992, in a world where there was no internet, there was no way to look things up on Google, no email. There things weren't open 24 hours a day.
We'd both been working in animation for a few years. I started at Hanna-Barbera, and she started at Disney.
And we met at Disney.
We met at Disney doing the Disney Afternoon for about 3 years, and we had since both gone freelance because they kind of basically let all their staff go. And I'd worked for Fox on a season of Beetlejuice,
which was a new network at that time.
Yeah, brand new. It was a little tiny thing. There's ABC and NBC and 5%
and CBS,
and 5% of the audience with this new little half network called Fox. And we got a call in February of '92 from people I'd worked with at Fox. Said, "Guess what? Tomorrow morning, you're going to be running this new X-Men show. There's going to be 30 people there, and Stan Lee and Haim Saban and all these people from Marvel and all around, and you're going to be in charge of developing this new X-Men show for them, and get there in the morning." And I'm kind of biting my lip and saying, that's a comic book, right? And it's Sunday night,
right,
and I can't go to a comic book store. There's no internet, so I can't Google X-Men. And I just had to sit there in that meeting and kind of nod and let everybody else that knew what the hell they were talking about go through that 3 hours, and then learn them really quickly to keep the job. But that's we got it through, and then of course Julia is one of the writers I hired to do the show once I was in charge of the writing side of it, and so we got the show. Basically, I'd worked on a few things for the head guys at Fox, Margaret Lesh and Sidney Highwater before that, and they just figured for some reason decided I had the right style, I was the right tool for the job.
Right. And Margaret Lesh, as you mentioned in your previous book, I'm sure she's mentioned in this one, but might as well mention the previous book as well, which of course you have. previously on X-Men, which is what I spoke with you about back in January, you definitely talk a lot about how important she was, and I think a lot of times you have these shows that, somebody at a network really is focused on. I mean, you hear reports about how after 13 episodes, NBC wanted to cancel Cheers, so, and Seinfeld's a great example too. That's another show that didn't have great ratings. And so it takes having someone at a network who really understands. And I feel like it's very easy with a property like X-Men, where you can just make the case, look how well this, at that point, the best selling comic book of all time was the new X-Men #1 from 1991. So you're able to say, like, believe me, this audience is here, we'll find it. And how much does it help to have, a cheerleader who, is also one of the coaches, I guess, is the best way to look at it.
It absolutely wouldn't have happened without her. She, for 10 years, she went around with Stan Lee's backing, saying,
she worked at Marvel for 10 years,
saying this would be the best animated show on TV. And NBC, CBS, and ABC said, nah, look, I know you got a couple million people reading the comic. Okay, cool. That's really nice. There are a bunch of pimply guys in their basements. That's not the audience. We need like 3 times that for a successful show. And they just said, this is way too adult. Comic book stuff doesn't work. There hadn't been big comic book, every decade or so there was a Superman movie or a Batman movie, but it just wasn't part of the movie and TV culture. And the Marvel attempts at TV hadn't been particularly good. So nobody believed in her. But she got in position and she showed this to her boss at Fox.
Because she had a boss too.
And he said, oh, I don't get it either. This is way too adult and way too dark. And I just don't see why kids will watch this. And she said, but I'll bet my job on it. If this doesn't go, you can fire me. And it took that, took her getting a position and risking her job to get the green light to get the show made, the first season. And we were all let go before the show before the first season started, because we'd finished our work and they just figured it wasn't going to go.
Figured it was 13 episodes and done.
And so all the creative people were let go to other shows. And a couple months later it premieres and it's the biggest hit on TV for kids. And they frantically are calling back, okay, guys, come back. We need more seasons of this. And we're making money now. But until it got the numbers, they didn't believe it. Only Margaret and Sydney at Fox believed in it.
Yeah, that was it.
In the chat, Kama Egan points out that's quite the gamble to get the show made. Absolutely. And now, obviously, a great example for the success of the show is where Michael comes into play with one of his props. It wasn't just on TV. There is the very famous Pizza Hut tie-in, the VHS cassettes, where I believe you could get a meal, and I think there was a cup with it. And look at those well-preserved VHS cassettes.
Those are pristine. Those are pristine. Those are mint in box, man.
Still in the packaging.
Ours are worn out. We've got about a dozen of the cups though, with the X cup covers.
Oh yeah,
and placemats and the whole deal.
Yeah, and some of the.
I was 7 years old in 1992.
Target demographic.
Perfect.
The way I started getting into comic books was through comic book cards, because my dad would buy baseball cards, and then he was like, well, he's not really into this, and he would buy me some packs of the cards. So I learned about these characters before I even was reading the comic books. So when your show came out, it just changed the game for me, because it was like having all these trading cards come to life. And that kind of pushed me to start, as a 7-year-old, this was a more kid-friendly thing. So that's between the cards and the show, that's where my love for comic books really began.
We have heard from people that the comic book industry is huge. It is vast. But the way into comic books for a lot of folks was a different way, and that for some folks it was through X-Men the animated series.
Yeah. And again, the numbers are, for the comics it was in the millions, and for TV it's in the tens of millions. So there's this leap of quantity, and that was, and the difficult thing is they're very different. They're very different to write. We probably, if we broke our backs, we might not be able to write good comics. It's just they're different crafts, they're different form. And some of the people that wrote really good comics made the transition to animation, but some didn't. So it wasn't a done deal. Just because the X-Men comics in the 80s were really strong and wonderful and well written, didn't mean that they didn't necessarily make good TV shows. And that was our big challenge. We didn't know, and it takes 7 or 8 months for the show to be animated. So we're waiting there the whole time. We've written 13. We've got faith that it's going to be cool. It's going to work. That the audience is going to like it. But we've been on other shows where we thought it was, our work was good, and it just ended up horrible failures. So you never know until people watch it.
Well, do you know how hard it is for a 7-year-old to wait between seasons? It felt like a year, like years. I was just waiting.
Yeah,
which challenge enough to get the permission to write multi-parters for X-Men, because it's like kids.
There were a lot of part 1, part 2, part 3s. I mean, there was one I felt like went on a really long time.
Yeah, and I mean I know that the Phoenix Saga was like, afternoon, like weekdays, so it was like, the whole, so it was like, so you don't have to wait a month to see all of it. And the show came along, I guess it premiered when I was 16, but my little sister was 9, so it was the perfect thing that we could both watch together, because I'd been reading the comics actually since I was 7. And the interesting thing is, the way in originally for me was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, because I loved Spider-Man, and there were I think 2 episodes with the X-Men, so that's like when I first knew those characters at all, was from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So I think that those shows are good to watch with my really little kids right now. The older ones, like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, I think when they're a little older, these shows will be good for them. But I think that they're not quite there yet. I know what scares them and what doesn't. There's like parts of Toy Story that are a little much for them. So you're like, okay, so maybe not Apocalypse or Mr. Sinister just yet.
Yeah, you got to be a thoughtful parent.
Yeah, exactly. But again, remembering back in 1992, the vast majority of folks hadn't really heard of the X-Men. They could name Wonder Woman or Batman, probably Spider-Man, but ask them for more, you wouldn't get the automatic, Wolverine.
We had this weird warning. We were told at least 85% of the people that might turn on to our show would never have heard of the X-Men and didn't know what mutants were. So we had to be careful to keep that really clear in at the beginning, and spend a lot of time introducing the world they were in and what they were and why they were, because we couldn't take for granted everybody. Oh yeah, no, Superman, he flies and he knocks buildings over. That was public knowledge. X-Men wasn't.
Right, exactly. And just a quick comment from the chat. Jacob Downey points out how upset he would get with the cliffhangers. And it's just reading the comics and watching the shows. And it's like, sometimes you're like, well, I think I might know what happens from comics that I read, 5 years ago, but you don't really know. And a lot of times it's sort of deviated from that. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about adapting and I know that you and I talked a little bit about this back in January, but the starting point before you get to this series is what ended up being a one-off, this animated The Pride of the X-Men, which had it was a like beautifully animated show. It had the characters that it was a great style. And it had the characters that I loved the most from the X-Men. But that was the interesting thing. A couple years later, when your show comes along, the team is actually very different in the comics. This is sort of what I think a lot of people think is the Jim Lee team, because that's when he was drawing the book. That's X-Men #1 from 1991. So I think that it's interesting that just a few years it changed, and my favorite character, Kitty Pryde, is completely left out of the series. But I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of that process. I'm sure at some point you were made aware of that show and, what maybe did and didn't work about it. So I'm just sort of curious as to, kind of developing it based on, things that had come before.
That one actually came from Marvel at a time when Margaret Lash and Sidney Iwanter and Larry Houston
and a lot of the same executives and artists were involved in making that show.
Were at Marvel at the time and worked on the process of making that show because Margaret was so keen on getting something out there to show folks. No, you don't understand. This is going to be a great show. And so she made this one-off happen.
Yeah, it's like $300,000 gamble on her part. So the show could be so good. And unfortunately, she and Sydney and the artists, all of whom worked on our show, who all believed in kind of the vision we had on our show, they didn't have creative control of Pride of the X-Men.
No.
And so what happened, I mean, it was trying to be used as half a dozen things, but the merchandisers were trying to stuff as many characters into the 22 minutes as they could. And various other people had agendas. Like one of the executives said, well, Crocodile Dundee is hot. Let's make Wolverine Australian. You know, everybody with any sort of leverage or power put their 2 cents worth in. And so it became this thing where there wasn't really any room for the story and there wasn't room to get to know the characters. Well, all the things that allowed our series to breathe and to become popular for people to fall in love with it, gradually they stuffed everything but the kitchen sink into this. And we think all the creative people looking back who worked on both series think that was one of the things that we tried not to do. That's cool, can be cool from a fan standpoint. Oh, I saw 38 different mutants in one episode. Isn't that cool? And they all did their powers. And none of them had more than 5 seconds of screen time, so you didn't get to care about any of them. So that was what we thought was the core problem. It wasn't Kitty's fault. Unfortunately, of course, like 3 or 4 years later, when our show comes along, she's kind of tainted goods. And Marvel was pushing Jubilee at the time, so we had to do one or the other.
Yeah.
And they just said, okay, it's going to be Jubilee, and we said, fine,
okay.
We can work with either one. But that's the reason that they tried with her, but it just was it was kind of the sales tool thing that they thought they had. They weren't really thinking as story writers, or they were thinking as merchandisers. And we think most of us involved in both think that that's what sunk it.
And also, if you go and watch Pride of the X-Men, it really is, Professor X over here and Magneto over here and there. Rah, 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 rah. Whereas in going back and examining X-Men, the animated series, the thing you and Mark Edens came up with as you crafted those first 13, which you were told were going to be the only 13, probably. So these are the stories. Yeah. Whatever you want to tell your best stories. Making the X-Men and Professor Xavier work toward the issue of humanity being terrified by the possibility of mutants and mutations, and trying to work with humanity, making humanity's terror and fear the big bad that you're fighting against, suddenly breathe new life into this show in terms of who you're fighting each week.
Yeah.
It's not just one mutant against another mutant and they're just going to fight and then they're going to stop fighting and they're going to do it again next week. This became a whole different sort of allegory for all kinds of things, because Magneto's opinion technically is just as valid as Xavier's in terms of viewing the way the world.
Right.
Yeah, we wanted Magneto to be an adversary, not an enemy, and we wanted to understand all the characters, what they were all trying to do, so that make them more human, and write them as the 30-year-old adults that they were. In the books, is very fairly sophisticated, and as Julia said, for like the 20 years of the writing that mostly we took from, because the new X-Men since 1975 are quite different from the original 60s X-Men, which were more American. They're much younger. It's a very different world. So from the second set of X-Men, we saw trends. Those of us that were laying out stories and who hadn't really looked at the X-Men before, we saw two big paths. One was kind of the professional wrestling thing. Well, I've got this power. No, I've got this power, and we're gonna have a match and see who wins and fight. And so it's just kind of mutant against mutant battles, and that's interesting. But that's not nearly as interesting, we thought, as mutants being a community that's struggling with the 99.5% of people who aren't mutants, who are scared to death of them, of their emergence, reasonably, and are reacting to it. And so making it about mutancy and not about fighting the bad super mutant of the week was our first creative decision, because there were dozens of stories in the books that did either. And we just found the ones that focused on the mutancy stronger than the ones that focused on the battles.
Yeah, I remember, I just sort of talking about the dichotomy between Professor Xavier and Magneto. One of the times I spoke with Chris Claremont, who obviously wrote X-Men for so many years in the comics, just the fact that Magneto had the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and he's like, well, yeah, I didn't come up with that name. So you had holdovers from that original, some sort of the conventions, and I think that sort of on a very sophisticated level, people see them more like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, in terms of they have very they have the same goal to a point. And just Magneto goes so much further with it. I wanted to backtrack, though, because you brought up Jubilee. And Michael, I know that she's your absolute favorite. And growing up, my wife and her little sister both really liked having Jubilee on the show, because they're Chinese American. So there was an Asian character on the show. So they were very excited. And, look, these new X-Men, are so diverse. You're talking about the new X-Men from 1975 onward, that I think it was actually really revolutionary in comics at the time. But I know, Michael, you very much want to talk a little bit about Jubilation Lee herself.
Yes.
Well, you kind of answered my big ask, was how did we go from Kitty to Jubilee instead of like a Ileana? But I don't know what was going on with the comics back then, so I don't know they're pushing Jubilee, but I loved how she was kind of the gateway for the kids, because the kids, it's kind of weird to think about kids hanging out with superheroes, but at the time I would go to the mall and hang out in the arcade while my parents would go shop. Like, she was like an older version of me, and it was just felt like a lot more relatable. Oh, I could imagine myself, in a few years with these superheroes. And I love how much Jubilee, I don't know how much you follow, but I love how much Jubilee has transformed through the comics over the years. I don't. Are you guys aware that she was a vampire for a while?
Motherhood and vampirism, is that?
What do you guys think about that?
Well, we started with her at 13, and so
I suppose, yeah.
We gave her first kiss. There's a image in the book. I think they got it, where in our storyboard, it's the second Mojo episode. And what's his name? Longshot. This cute young man. They have an adventure together. At the end of it, he leans down, but before the end of the show, leans down and kisses her. And in the storyboard, he kisses her on the lips. But she's 14,
and therefore
we had to redraw it, and he kisses her on the forehead. But we still had the original storyboard where he kisses her on the lips. So Jubilee got her first appreciative superhero to superhero kiss in our storyboard. I can't find the page number.
Yeah,
I'm looking as fast as I can.
But take our word for it.
What a better reason to make sure that people go out and buy the art and making of the animated series, which of course is now available. And I love seeing people holding it up on social media and kind of reacting to it. And I had left this page open earlier because we were talking about Pride of the X-Men, and you actually covered in here. You have the VHS and some of the storyboards and things. So you actually start with that, and there's images from Spider-Man and his amazing friends. And why I circle back to that is Michael B points out, I learned about mutants from Spider-Man and his amazing friends. I didn't know there were comics until later. And I think your show had the same effect, that the idea of comic books was something that was foreign. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, look, the comics that Michael talked about, the tie-in, the X-Men Adventures, which were geared at the same audience, so it's sort of, we were talking beforehand. It's the funny thing where it's comic books adapted to an animated series turned back into a comic book, so I think that it's kind of great that, it sort of opens people up, kids really in particular, to that. So obviously there's so much to talk about the show, but I wanted to take a moment and, did you find it there? Is that that's
there's her kiss.
There's the kiss. The funny thing about Mojo and Longshot, it's stayed with me all these years. There is a great joke in one of those episodes that Longshot had, and it's almost a throwaway. He's talking about a woman that he knew with two heads, and someone asks him, did you like her? And he says, yes and no. And it's just such a simple moment. But if I'm thinking about it 25 years later or whatever, obviously it was just I was just like, wait, that was a great Longshot joke. And look, he's a character that I really liked. He was in the X-Men from the late 80s. And then he just kind of disappears one day, like literally disappears. But so I think that was kind of the great thing, that as the show goes along, you're able to incorporate some of these other characters, characters who had moved on to other teams, like Nightcrawler was on Excalibur at that point, whereas if you had created this exact show at the time that prior to the X-Men was created, you would have had a largely different team, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, choosing who'd been involved in it, I was handed a list, and I think it was maybe in a board game I had, but I was handed a list also from Marvel. There'd been 29 different X-Men from 1963 to January 1992. And he was saying, this gives us a certain amount of flexibility.
This is what Eric had to learn from. And notice, this is a photocopy from Larry Houston with his note saying, look, Xavier can't walk in this. He's in a wheelchair. That's how we learned about the X-Men.
But in boiling down to 7 or 8 characters, which is still a lot to manage in a 22-minute story, we had a certain amount of latitude. I mean, he was the people at Marvel. Bob Harris was our liaison there. The guy that he was in charge of all the X titles.
But he was in New York.
He was in New York. Yeah, this poor guy. He was working 75 hours a week and helping us, reading our scripts, giving us notes, letting us know, what certain characters would work or what wouldn't, or if something were true to the canon. But he said on the very first day, he said, "Look, guys, we understand. There's 30 years of material here. All these different characters." You have to pick the ones that you think will work best as a TV show and will work best together in the stories you're telling. And within reason, there's 3 or 4 people you got to use, like Wolverine and Xavier. But beyond that, it's really up to you guys who fits best in your stories and how they work together best. And that was a bit freeing, because we weren't like, oh, we need the blue team or the yellow team.
Or it has to be this, or it has to be that.
Whatever, crazed fans today would say, oh no, this is there was no internet at the time, which was a blessing. We kind of did this under the radar in our garage by ourselves. And it came out and people liked it, and that was fine. There was no back and forth with people that had expectations for the show. And that was kind of freeing. It was, looking back, if I'd known how much people care about these characters, I would have been much more scared and nervous, trying to get the show done. But at the time, we were given a fair amount of freedom to go where the characters took us.
Yeah, what you were talking about earlier, not being able to just Google X-Men. Just imagine if you did, and then you'd be like, oh my God, like all these screens on just Wolverine. And, like, oh, look, here's Storm. At some point she doesn't have powers. Check out that cool mohawk, and it's just like, I think you would have kind of been overloaded, and you would have obviously been able to figure out what worked for the show, but sort of being limited. And, look, the idea of getting, Xerox's facts to you of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which you were kind of showing there, is very interesting. There's a very specific question from the chat that I wanted to throw in. Cami Egan asked, was there a storyline you would have liked to have done? Now, this could have either been an original storyline or something from the comics, but the content was maybe a little bit too much for Saturday morning.
Got one.
Because again, season 1 was supposed to be one and done. So episode 1 through 13, that was going to be it. There was no hope beyond that. But upon the realization that there was going to be a second season, the show had ended with Scott proposing
marriage to Jean. And that was at the very end of the show. And that just ended happily originally as we wrote it, and it was boarded and it was animated. And then in the transition time, in the few months between that show being made and then an order for, we're going to do another season, we sat down, Mark Eden and I sat down, okay, let's lay out a second season. We've sort of shown who these people are. Let's get some more personal stories like the Beast story or
Rogue's Tale.
They go really in depth into one of these people at a time, even if we don't see much of the rest of the team. So we're going to all these cool personal stories. But we thought the first thing we got to do is we have to address the fact that we ended season 1 with a marriage proposal. So we thought we'd start season 2 with Jean and Scott married, and Jean was 7 months pregnant with a baby bump in the spandex. And they go around and have 5 or 6, massive fights against huge supervillains. And then at some point, about the mid part of the season, they'd have a double mutant baby.
Right.
And we'd set that up and thought, this would be so cool. What would this double mutant baby? And of course, Marvel ends up some other time, with them procreating. It happens.
And getting married.
Yeah. But every single person, people at Marvel, people at Fox, all of our creative peers, all the artists, everybody said, are you kidding? Our core viewer is a 12-year-old boy. They don't want to see their mother 7 months pregnant running around fighting
in spandex.
Get rid of the marriage, get rid of the baby. So that was the one thing. And Mark and I were just innocent about it. We both of our families just had babies. We thought it was the coolest thing in the world for the show, and we were wrong. So we got immediately talked out of it.
Now,
was the baby going to? I'm sorry.
Baby's probably going to go a little dark,
Oh yeah. Oh,
was the baby going to be Rachel Summers?
Well, it could have been Rachel. It could have also been Cable, whose mother was a clone of Jean Grey in the comics, Madeline Pryor. So you could have also done something completely different.
Yeah, who knows?
Probably the desire would have been to come up with something completely different. Because
and Kame says would love to have seen Jean Grey kicking ass while pregnant. I think most people would have because. Go ahead.
Speaking of Jean Grey, the voice talent on that, Catherine Disher.
Oh yeah,
funny little moment here behind the scenes because that was all up in Toronto. All the voice talent happened in Toronto. We didn't get to meet them personally, but
and she and Professor X in real life were married. And she just given birth up there, and so
she, the joke was she actually had a double mutant baby, because and she remember saying that she would go out in the lobby to breastfeed during recording sessions, but it's
hide behind the fern.
There was a double mutant baby born, just not on the show.
Only in real life
around the show. So.
Yeah. Sort of the reverse of that question is, was there pressure when you start getting a couple seasons in, like, well, you're going to have to do a Phoenix and a Dark Phoenix, and we want to see the Starjammers? Or was there just excitement of like more on your part? Well, we want to tell those stories. Or, does it get involved like, well, we'd sure like to sell some Starjammers action figures?
Luckily, we never got to everybody's credit. We got a few of those things. There were a few confusing moments before the show became a success.
Before it even aired.
Yeah, before it even aired, where we were getting some merchandising pressure. But the people at Fox really fought that off. There were 2 or 3 different incidents of, you got to feature all this stuff in the show. And Margaret just called them up and said, to hell with that. Fox has final cut. Don't even bring it up again. But they were serious fights, and it could have really ruined the show if we had to do, if we had to put some of the stuff in that, some of the toys or, whatever.
Well, I remember from the last time I talked to you, they wanted everybody to have cars with their face on it, right?
Yeah. There was that. There was a what's the word?
McDonald's Happy Meal.
Yeah, McDonald's Happy Meal in Australia.
In Australia,
and they were insisting that Storm, who can fly, should have a tricycle with her head, going.
Which makes a cool toy, but that's not what the show is.
Cool cheap toy. So, but luckily, as far as the stories went, the first 2 seasons went so well. In fact, we asked them about Days of Future Past. Mm-hmm. We asked, well, we're coming up with mostly original stories using bits and pieces from some of your stories from your world, but what about trying to do an adaptation? They liked the idea, so Julia did part one of that one. And so out of the first 26, that was the only one was really a direct attempt to do an adaptation. Well, after the first 26, we had a big meeting at Marvel. A bunch of us from LA flew to New York for a few days. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, they're going to commit to 39 more, which was really cool to us. I mean, that was like, hey man, there's a year and a half of income. We're good. And that was, was stage one. And then being responsible for the stories, when they came up with stuff, we were begging them, come up, tell us your best stories. We don't know them well enough. And they said, oh, well, how about Phoenix and Dark Phoenix? And as opposed to being a weird, heavy responsibility or feeling beat up or feeling imposed upon
or terrified,
to me, there's 9 episodes I can check off my list. I'm supposed to come up with 39. Well,
yeah,
now I'm down to 30, and I can worry about the other 30. There's 9 I can focus on and start handing off to people, to my best writers. So in that way, it was more of a relief and a gift to get the Phoenixes.
Here I am on page 143. God, I'm the wrong angle.
Well, and
a copy of Eric's memo from that meeting talking about the different opportunities.
And they suggested a bunch of stuff, and we used about half of them, and we didn't use another half of it. One of them was, give us a second Mojo episode. There were certain things that they suggested that we were able to fit in, and others that we tried and
just not enough time.
Either not enough time or space, or whatever stories we came up with, the character nobody liked. Each story had to be signed off on by the people at Fox. So that would be a cool story.
Right.
Even if whether it came from the comics or not, it went through the same process of we had to pitch the stories to the network to see if they loved them or not. And until they loved them, they weren't going to greenlight them and let us go ahead. So it was just everyone agreed on the 2 Phoenixes. That was a gift.
Well, yes, and as I've said to you before and said on the show a number of times, there's 3 instances of Dark Phoenix being told on the screen, and so much far and away the animated version, it was so well done, and it really understood the heart of it. There's things I like about both of the movies. I'm talking about The Last Stand and the one that's just called Dark Phoenix. And you can point to problems behind the scenes and all those, but this actually, it told the story in the way that you understood the kind of gravity of it. And yeah, look, I'm definitely biased because of how much I enjoyed the actual comic book versions of that, which I don't know, like 2 or 3 when that happened. So I read them long after the fact, and just sort of going back and reading those in a trade paperback, you're like, wow, this is really heavy stuff. Telling that story, there's sort of this, there's this moment. In fact, there was a memo within Marvel that at the end of the comic book version, Jean Grey had to die, and Chris Claremont and John Byrne felt if she was going to die, she was going to stay dead, which lasted for 5 whole years. So she stayed dead forever for 5 years, which, look, in comic book terms, 5 years is a pretty long time. Yeah. Talk a little bit about sort of the way that, you take something like that is kind of the weight of the story, that's how it ends. And, you're able to adapt it to Saturday morning and also, then doing an ongoing series thereafter.
Just a minor challenge in this kind of adaptation for what was a Saturday morning kids animated series. Jean as the Phoenix, ends up devouring, planets.
She had, but she had. Our limit
in
was
the comic book. She devoured planets and killed people, right?
Yeah, I think she ate
our
her sun, and you see this planet. You see everybody looking up as their sun is extinguished. I mean, it's this terrible moment, that
they all
visualize
die
right now.
They all die in the comics. She could devour a planet, but it had to be an empty planet.
Right.
I mean, that was some of the differences. We fought really hard the first season to show that the X-Men, being an X-Men, had consequences and heroic sacrifice, and that's why Morph was killed in the second episode. And he was supposed to stay dead.
He was really supposed.
He was really just like with Chris. He was, please, he's supposed to. And then they did it. They did a focus group and found out the kids loved him most of all, and so the network really begged us to bring him back. So we ended up doing it. But our plan was he was put in there in the first story to be killed and to stay dead. But then with the Phoenixes, there were at the end of the first Phoenix, she goes out to the sun, and there's a, I don't know if you know, there's a she's all, if you could just see the beautiful light, or whether just before she dies in that. And then the next episode is supposed to be she's found alive, and the Phoenix form has saved her from incinerating in the sun.
Is that No Mutant Island?
Yeah, No Mutant is Island.
The episode
had production problems and didn't show up for 2 years later. So the poor kids at the time, they watch her die in the sun, and then the next episode, she's just bopping along, she's doing fine. Yeah. No explanation about, this is how she survived, and everybody's relieved because they have a memorial service for her.
Scott leaves the X-Men.
Leaves the X-Men in the episode supposed to follow the Phoenix cycle. But anyway, so that was an almost death. And then the one in the Dark Phoenix, we asked, and they just said, okay, 2 things. One, you want to keep using her on the show, so that's going to be difficult. And 2, we just really don't want her to, to die as well. So we went back and forth, and we came up with this thing about this science fiction thing about sucking out 1/10 of their life force,
but they're all willing to give that.
They're all willing to sacrifice
to keep her alive.
7 years of their life to bring her back to life, and that was the best we could imagine. And it also reinforced the X-Men thing about them being a family that would be there for each other.
Yeah, no, and look, as your comic book or superhero resurrections go, it's not a bad one. The one in the comics they went with, but that was Phoenix that died. This is Jean, so this is her body that got put in a cocoon right when she turned into. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to believe it. You know why? Because I want to. Because I like her and I want to keep seeing her. And I think ultimately that's probably what it went down to. There. Looked like a little freeze there for a second.
There we are. We're back
there you
now.
go. Yeah, you guys froze for a second, so I just popped you back out. But go ahead.
Yeah. No. So those. Oh, and now. Okay. There we go. Hello again.
That's all right. And look, Ken in the chat, I agree. The cartoon was the best. It's hard to argue with it. That the way that that story in particular was told. Now, Michael, when you were watching the show, you were 7. Did you just like watching it every week, or did one stand out? Like, oh, this is my favorite one. So you liked Jubilee?
Oh no, everything, just everything. It was just a dream come true. It was real. I mean, I want to see a X-Men movie that feels that soap opera, like, that just feels that. I mean, when I think of your show, I think very much of Chris Claremont and the pacing and the stakes he had, and the stakes were high, and that's always been my problem with Marvel movies. I always feel like the stakes aren't really high enough. Like, oh yeah, they're fighting to save the world again, but they'll win. And it's like we just saw so many different things. Like, even like, I thought it was so cool how you did Storm and Calypso and how all that went. Like, that was this whole other storyline, and it was just so different. you really didn't dumb things down for kids. You actually might have made us smarter, like putting like things like this, you know, those kind of storylines, the storylines that just, you know, make you more, just make things more real instead of just watching like a Yogi Bear cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, I always compare it to like the really old superhero cartoons. You know, the ones that you would think of would be these are DC characters, but the Super Friends, and it was like it might as well have been Scooby Doo because like everybody has to laugh at the end, and you don't know why. And even as a kid, I'm like, this isn't funny, you know. But you always had sort of those things, and I think that this came along at the perfect time where there was the idea of like, well, what if we didn't dumb it down for kids? Like, we don't want to terrify them, but maybe being a little bit scared isn't so bad, you know. I mean, that must have been because, you know, you've talked about some of the animation that you worked on before. I mean, what was the difference with this project in terms of, you know, like I think that Beetlejuice as a movie is not particularly kid friendly. But I do remember the animated series, and you're able to take a character. It's like, well, let's just talk about how silly he is instead of how scary, you know?
Yeah.
Again, starts at the top with Margaret Lesh
And Sydney.
and Sydney Iwaner. Having worked mostly up until that point on things like the Disney afternoon shows, which I still love and adore. That you know, that those are spectacular shows. Then working on X-Men. The edict was you do not write down to kids. You write these stories up, you know,
treat them for ourselves.
Treat them like a half-hour live action drama, you know, and be honest. And when you got in third season, I think it is the Nightcrawler episode, fourth season has a special place in my heart. But just the fact that that the folks at Fox, meaning Margaret and Sydney and everybody, you're going to have a discussion about. Oh, yeah.
That's going to be the center of the show, and push it harder. Our first outline of the story had more action in it.
Oh yeah, we're it's a little bit of a dicey connection for a moment there. Yeah, but we'll bring them back in. And so we lost a little bit of what you were saying, and they're actually not quite back yet. So. But while we're getting back with them, sorry, I wanted to have this. Sam says that it was a kid's cartoon, but it was very grown up. And you know, it's very easy to kind of agree with that. And we're going to try and get them back in. You know, everybody kind of saw the way it was breaking up. But the book we're talking about is this great book here. It is called X-Men, The Art and Making of the Animated Series. And you know what? We kind of lost what they were talking about, which was the Nightcrawler episode. It dealt with religion kind of at the center of it. And, you know, I think that that is kind of a very important, you know, I mean, it's very sophisticated. And you would think, you know, maybe even just a couple years earlier, Michael, they wouldn't be dealing with any of this stuff. You know what I mean?
No, definitely not. I mean, from like Rogue to Mystique, and you know how they're like mother and daughter, and it's just, and Mr. Sinister, like there's so many adult things in this that are just major crazy twists and
I've got some images that I'm sharing. These are from the book. You know, some of these sort of you know, basically character design and notes on the characters. I really like this one on Wolverine. You know, there's some very cool stuff that you can take a look at there.
That's the first time I've ever seen him without his head.
Yeah, that's true. That is him without his head. And we're bringing Eric and Julia back in now. Sorry about that. Yeah, it just it seemed like you guys needed a little soft reset there. But you were talking about the Nightcrawler episode and how it dealt with religion, which is obviously, you know, such a sophisticated thing for, you know, really children of any age. You know, I mean, I could see a primetime network drama at the same time saying like, no, we're not going to deal with that.
And a lot of it deals respectfully with the idea of religion and what it means and faith and how that is influences who Nightcrawler is. That's like the core of who he is as a character. But you also have Gambit off to the side saying, I'm not interested, and then you have Wolverine struggling. And it's like, that is a profoundly important kind of dialogue to be able to have. And I haven't seen it before or since.
Yeah, and we owe that to Margaret and Sydney and Fox. And at the time, I think what allowed them to do it, because 5 years later with different people, Fox would never have done it. It wasn't anything about Fox that was liberating. It was those two people that made it liberating. It was a new network. They wanted to get attention. Sydney was really ambitious to tell the most challenging stories we could. And Margaret was part of her, what she was told was, we need to get attention for our little network. And they got it. They went from 5% to 50% of the audience with the show in the matter of a month.
Yeah.
So that was what they did worked, but it was their belief that we would treat it respectfully, that we wouldn't offend people, religious people across the country by the way we treated it. And so that there's a certain back and forth trust that we established the first season, that if we were allowed to do something like kill Morph or have a character who struggles through something very adult, that we would treat it respectfully and not gratuitously.
I want to do a shout out to a woman named Avery Coburn, who was the broadcast standards and practices person in charge at Fox Kids at the time. And if she hadn't been as sensitive, as tuned in to what the X-Men themselves were, the show would never have gotten off the ground.
Yeah.
Because she allowed the show to be what it was.
Everything we talked about, if she had said, no, you can't do it, it wouldn't have been in the show.
Yeah.
And she would start out sometimes saying, well, no, you can't have Gambit just saying there is no God. And then we talk about it a little bit, we go back and forth, and she would allow it. Or she didn't want us burning down the monastery, but in the end she realized it was important for the storytelling. So there's a real back and forth between the showrunner, especially on a kid's show, and the network censor or broadcast standards person. And she's the best one we ever worked with by a mile, because she liked the books. I mean, that was a starting point. She understood who the characters were, and that allowed us to do things with them that another person never would allow us to do.
Before we run out of time, I want to talk about the end of the show, but I do want to get a couple of comments in here. Daniel Drew points out, all the love for Cold Vengeance. Sabretooth's design in the show is my favorite iteration of him anywhere. Same with Cable. Talk about including the character of Sabretooth, which Michael's got right there on X-Men Adventures, which is interestingly a Chris Claremont created character, but not originally for the X-Men. It was an Iron Fist that he actually created the character. And then he obviously is so well associated with Wolverine. It depends on where you are in the timeline of reading comics. Is he Wolverine's father? Is he just somebody that he's known for a while? There's a lot of back and forth sort of about that. So talk about incorporating that character, but also in a way of like where you need to have him. There's a certain level which you have to dial back a character like Sabretooth, I would say, for an animated series.
Doesn't the whole series begin with a shot of Sabretooth tearing up police cars? I mean, he kicks it off. The first image is Sabretooth.
Right, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so I think, one, we were simply, on a very simple level, told this is Wolverine's most personal nemesis. This is the guy that gets under his skin the worst. And so if we want to get to know more about Wolverine, we always try to write stories that would reveal things about our core cast. That was all. We'd go back to that. If it was going to be 300 stories, each one had to start with, how do the guest characters reveal more about the core cast? Because it's always about the core cast. And
it was a big cast.
So bringing him in really helped. We tried to understand Wolverine's rages and some of his history. And luckily, there was some with Sabretooth. There was some stuff that was done to him, and they were a little close in the past, or the thing with Creed, and it just we were able to use. He seemed he's someone dramatic for animation. That was another thing. A number of choices we made for characters are their powers or their look, or what they do is it animation friendly. The downside for Sabretooth is we can't show him ripping up people. We can show him ripping up stuff, but that was a downside we always had to be aware of for Sabretooth. We can show Cyclops blowing up the biggest building you want to, but Sabretooth, it's limited. We couldn't show blood, and we couldn't show people gouging other people, so his claws could only go so far. But it seemed a really important part of Wolverine's life, and that's why we highlighted him.
And there's an interesting moment early in the series where Wolverine calls out Professor X, saying, "Well, how come I'm supposed to take it easy on Sabretooth, but you get to send the troops in on the person you're not fond of?"
Yeah.
Which was, I think a smart way to look at it.
I know I've read a similar obstacle for obviously a different universe, but adapting the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to a cartoon, because they have all these really cool weapons, but it's like, yes, you can only use them on robots, so it's like, well, I guess we're going to fight a lot of robots, aren't we? So.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating, and because we're given this marching orders that these guys are in. There, millions of people's lives are at stake over what these mutants do, and yet we can't show anybody punch anybody, or we can't show anybody stab anybody. We usually can't ever show anybody kill anybody. So it does constrain your storytelling a little bit, but we felt we transferred the intensity over to the personal emotions, rather than the amount of violence and death that would have been in the books.
In Night of the Sentinels, Wolverine comes down the ramp and clocks Cyclops in the stomach, out of rage and grief, and I think comes off next time I use the claws or whatever. But he getting permission from Avery, from Sydney, from Margaret to allow that moment. That's the only time in the whole series.
That was a big get. Nobody on our team ever punched each other ever again.
Ever.
In 76 episodes.
But again, they understood this was a function of his grief and anger.
Yeah. I mean, the importance of that is obviously not lost in it. And yeah, I mean, it's good to have people who understand sort of, that level of things. And one more question from someone. Where did the idea of Storm, this is from Michael B., where did Storm's godson come from? And where did the name Mjnari come from?
She wrote the episode.
I wrote that episode.
Perfect.
Okay. There was a lot of back and forth with folks on the artistic side. Larry Houston and Will Mineo on the art side of it had a real deep knowledge of the comic books themselves. And when the idea of Storm going back to her village, and some of the information was coming from I think Larry Houston, and I think we got a few things faxed and sent to us from New York. I'm going to say Mjnari. The name existed as the name, I think, for a healer in the village, and we're just trying to take pieces from things that were in the books that we could then use into the series. I roundabout here, but I think it's a testament that fans of the comic books speak so fondly of the show, just because there weren't that many direct adaptations, but pieces and things that worked that we could then use in the show, and vice versa. It was a real free flowing time.
Yeah, we always tried to. Our mandate was we always tried to find if we had a story idea and an idea for scenes or various actions and various guest characters, find them within the Marvel universe to use rather than make up fresh ones. And that was just kind of out of respect for Marvel that we're using your characters. We could make this. The Eric and Julia characters if we wanted to, but we're much more focused on telling the best stories we could, and if we could find a Marvel character to fit the role, we would use him or her.
And so in whatever it takes, the kernel I think was, what would it take to get Storm to go back? What would be a big enough story or a personal enough story that could pull her back so we could have a story there?
Yeah, we wanted to show more about her history. That was the beginning of the second season, where we were trying to show as many personal histories as we could, and that was let's show as much of Storm's background as we can that we haven't seen already in the first season. We saw a little bit of it, a little bit of flashback in the first season.
So the idea of a godson who would then be in need of her assistance was, okay, that just, again, lining up all the pieces to make the story sort of flow. And then Mishnaari again, okay, well, there we go.
Right. Sam in the chat is talking about why was Wolverine typed as a Canadian in the show, despite having potential Japanese origins in the comics. The character evolved so much, even at the point you were doing the series. And then long after it, they've established in the years since that he fought in the Civil War. They've established that he has the bone claws that are, that the adamantium was actually fused to claws that were already. But so a lot of that stuff hadn't happened. There probably weren't elements that you had to incorporate. But that brings me to a story that is one of the final episodes, the flashback with Captain America. I think that's got Logan trying on some kind of like, for lack of a better word, just imitation claws.
Yeah.
And obviously with, the way that Captain America as a character in the last 15 years has really, taken off, it's great to have that episode to kind of look back on. I wanted to kind of ask about the genesis of that one. I know that there's actually a very famous Uncanny X-Men story. There's a cover with Wolverine, Captain America, and Black Widow. I believe it's Uncanny X-Men 268.
Bloodline or Blood Ties is the name of that.
Yeah, 268 of Uncanny X-Men. It's a flashback to that. Was that one of those ones where, somebody was like, oh, look, they did this in the comics? Or how does that come about that you do the flashback where we get to see Captain America on the show?
This is absolutely positively from the source. So whoever, over 50 years, over however many years in comics, people's histories keep on getting adjusted and revised because you have to try to make things fresh. But the guy who wrote that episode,
who wrote Old Soldiers,
we asked Len Wein, who co-created Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler, half a dozen other people with artists.
He had since moved out from New York and was in Los Angeles and was available to write for X-Men the animated series.
So Wolverine's creator, who made him Canadian, by the way. I don't know about the Japanese questions. This might be something 30 years later that they're trying to tack on. He was 95 years old in the show, so he moved around a lot. But his name was Logan, based on Mount Logan in Canada. He was specifically made to be a Canadian, the same way Colossus was made to be Russian or Nightcrawler was made to be German. He was absolutely positively, no question, in the creator of Wolverine's mind, Canadian. He was, because Len was asked to come up with a group of international characters. And so he came up with those from all these different, Storm being from Africa.
So then asking him in the final season, would you like to do an episode?
Yeah, and he said, well, I'd love to do an episode if I could do a Wolverine episode and bring in Captain America. And that was a legal question because there are rights issues involved, and we didn't have the rights to use Captain America. Marvel was being very controlling about, for whatever business purpose, about you can use these people here, you can't use these people over here.
X-Men was able to guest star on Spider-Man, but Spider-Man was not able
to guest star on X-Men. So whatever, but it was Len's request to do the show, and it was a very personal show for him, and it's, I guess, a story he's always wanted to tell because Wolverine's old enough to have fought in the Second World War. He was born around 1900. And so having him meet up and work with Captain America was kind of a dream for Len. So that's where that came from. And as far as the bone claws, that's a recent thing.
Len was absolutely
adamant about that. He said,
adamantium.
He said Wolverine was born with healing powers and nothing else. The adamantium was put into him by the creeps that put it into him, along with the claws. He didn't have bone claws. That was something that was never intended. Maybe for the first 15, 20 years of the book, certainly wasn't in Len's mind. So that's there's a controversy there, and there are people on both sides of it. But the guy that created the character did not give him bone claws.
We can tell you that.
We can tell you that from the heart. We've had
Yeah,
that.
and I think that was kind of it was more of like a surprise. They're in, I think it's Wolverine number 75, which I think Larry Hama was writing at that point. It was long after Chris Claremont had left. They sort of do this just grisly thing where Magneto rips all the adamantium out of it, and then as sort of a gotcha on the last page, it's like, oh, and I still have bone claws. And then of course, after a little while, you're like, yeah, but those adamantium claws are pretty cool. Let's go ahead and put those back. So yeah, it's all stuff that you don't need to worry about. And I know I keep saying that I'm going to move on, but I keep seeing questions in the chat that I think are great. Daniel Drew wants to know, do you have a favorite FOH Friends of Humanity storyline? For Daniel, those were always the most intense because of how scary real they felt. Yeah, I mean, I think those aren't supervillains. Those are people who are so scared that they're going to do everything they can to, really wipe out mutants.
Realistic villains.
God, this might sound self-serving because I came up and pitched the story that then went on to be written by Stephanie Matheson. But the episode Beauty and the Beast, where Beast falls in love and the galley falls in love with him. She can't see him. He doesn't think she's going to like him when she gets her sight back, which he helps her get her sight back. But she does. The tragedy is her father is a raging anti-mutant bigot, and the Friends of Humanity come to rescue Carly. And it just, oh God,
they burned down the eye clinic that Beast worked at.
Man.
And I believe that's the one where it has the when the Friends of Humanity grabbed Jubilee and it's they.
Oh no, this is the one where Wolverine has to go infiltrate. And the idea of Wolverine sort of being calculating and putting on an act to go in and join the Friends of Humanity,
pretending to be an anti-mutant bigot himself.
It's actually pretty fun.
His civilian clothes wardrobe definitely lends to him being able to blend in. I mean, the big cowboy hat and the flannel shirt and the interesting belts. All right, so obviously the show is a huge success, and there comes a time to end it. And there's sort of two parts to this story that I know from talking to you before and also reading the previous book previously on X-Men, that you geared up for a finale and then instead had to do, was it 10 more episodes or just 7 more?
11 more.
11 more. Yeah. So talk about sort of approaching the end, but then not being able to have that be the end and then having to kind of tack on a few more episodes.
It was professional. It was very awkward because if you really thought through a story well, you've set up the end of the story at the beginning, and all the scenes should build to what the end is. And the end was going to be the 5 X-Men leaving and 4 new ones.
For Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah,
the big 4-parter.
The big 4-parter Beyond Good and Evil, and it's supposed to be Bishop and Shard and Psylocke and Archangel coming into
the team
to be part of the team, and 5 of the original team leaving at the end of it. And all those characters were brought into the first couple episodes of the story so that at the end they could make this transition, and we'd understand why certain X-Men were ready to leave and why these people were ready to stay.
And this stuff doesn't get written in 15 minutes.
It's a 160-page story.
You come up with the idea, that's got to get approved. Then you come up with the premise, that's got to get approved. Then the outline. I mean, it's a long process,
right,
especially for a 4-parter.
And we've basically finished the 160-page script. And then we get to note saying, oh, no, so sorry, can't have any of them leave or any new people because we're going to do more episodes. And so we rewrote what we'd finished. And I think the story still works okay. Some people love it. I'm obviously frustrated by it because I knew what it had started out to be.
Yeah.
And then after that, for the last season, for the last 11 episodes, we lost Larry, our head director. We lost our editor, Sharon Janis, and we lost about a third of our budget.
Yeah.
Saban became in charge and decided to cut $100,000 out of the budget. So people notice the design in the last 11 it's simpler. I thought a couple of the stories worked great, like Captain America is one of the stories. And I really like the Phalanx story, the 2-parter.
And I still love Graduation Day.
And the finale. Now, given that we were disappointed with not being able to finish it with a bang with a 4-parter, I think I've now looked back and I'm I'm ambivalent because I really like the way it tied up in Graduation Day, where in effect Xavier dies and goes off to heaven, and all his friends and adversaries come together to watch him go, and that was
a heartfelt.
Yeah.
So yeah. Oh Lord, did we freeze?
No, you're good. Maybe I think Christian must have frozen. Well, I have one final question for you.
Sure.
You had it all set up and I know you go into this into the book, but you had it set up for a new team to come take the place of a good deal of the X-Men. Could you tell any of us what that team would have looked like in the way of a roster?
Yeah, that's weird. So it would have been Wolverine and Gambit and Rogue and the four new people we just had, and
Jubilee. Wouldn't Jubilee?
No, I think Jubilee was going.
Jubilee,
Storm, Xavier were leaving, and so were Scott and Jean.
Scott and Jean were going to go off and be
happy. It was going to be.
Jubilee had to go off to Generation X.
Yeah, exactly. That was the idea. She's going off with to be part of Generation X. So it was going to be the four new people and the four
remainers.
Yeah, Wolverine,
Gambit,
Rogue, and Beast.
Beast.
Yeah.
And few people
were
Psylocke. What did you say? The new people, the new roster was going to be
Psylocke, Archangel, Bishop, his sister Shard,
right,
and
Shard.
Yeah, that was it. Those four.
Well, that would have been so fun. Glad to have you back, Christian.
Michael, I don't even know. Can you guys hear me?
We hear
you.
Do you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Michael, you as the target demographic who would have seen change, you would have been 10 or 11 at that point. How do you think you would have taken that in the moment where okay, now next week, or I guess, the team would have changed and I guess the show would have ended. But how do you think you would have felt as a kid? Wait, the X-Men aren't the X-Men anymore.
Well, I would have thought, we're definitely going to get another season and I'm going to have a new team. I wouldn't have gotten that. Well, it's been so fun talking with you guys. This is just very surreal for me. I know.
Yeah.
And I know Christian's having a little technical difficulties, but where can everyone find you on the interweb if they want to keep up with you and your projects?
We are on. We use X-Men TAS because for X-Men the animated series, so that's how we sort of abbreviate ourselves. I'm on Twitter way too much, X-Men TAS. We have a web page that we got to get back up to and get going with. We're on Instagram and we're on Facebook. So please try and find us if you're a fan of the show. We just just have fun and remember it fondly. And I think today is the 1-year anniversary of Disney Plus going on the air. X-Men didn't roll out until I think earlier this year, but still,
it was on Hulu.
And a big new generation, seems to be finding the show, and that's profoundly gratifying too.
Yeah,
great. And you guys can find Christian at Christian DMZ. You there, Christian? We got you. All right, and you guys can find me on Instagram at I Hate Michael Shirley and on Twitter at Michael X Shirley. And tell everyone the name of your book and where they can find it.
It's the Phoenix Covenant coming. Phoenix Covenant coming. Phoenix Covenant.
Yeah,
we're being attacked by aliens.
Yeah, sorry about that. I tried to switch laptops and that just made it worse. I was glad that Michael was able to tie everything up. But yes, so there's the two books, the art and making of X-Men the Animated Series. And of course, this is just a beautiful book. I mean, we've seen just some of the pictures. I mean, you just look at anything and you're like, oh, wow, this is so cool to see how it all worked out. And then to just I mean, this book has great stuff in it too, but this is so much. It's just such an in-depth account previously on X-Men, and yeah. So I
Anywhere
apologize.
books are sold, right?
What's that?
Wherever
You get
books
them
are
anywhere
sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I mean the book's
Shop
been out
local.
for the new book's been out for about a month, and the other
Right.
book's from a couple years ago, right?
Yeah. From it's 3 years.
Yeah,
For the 25th anniversary. Yeah.
yeah.
But please,
Well,
yeah, shop local, folks. Go,
Yeah, of
if
course.
they don't have it, ask them to order it for you. They can do that. Yeah.
And I very much appreciate you being generous with your time. It was delightful to get the chance to talk to you again, and and apparently so did the chat. Cami Egan really enjoyed the backstories of the cartoon. So if either run out and buy the book, or if you're starting to do your wish lists for Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever occasion, for our Star Wars fans, it's about to be Life Day. So if you celebrate Life Day, that'll be coming up very soon. In any case, Julie and Eric, I heard that Michael had you give all the ways to keep in touch with you. So thank you very much. We really appreciated it, and looking forward to have more to talk to you about sometime in the near future.
Absolutely.
That would be
Kristen.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank
Michael,
you both.
Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. All right. So they were delightful. And Michael, thank you. I don't even know what happened. I froze, and I'm like, great, I'll just put the other laptop on. And that made it worse.
Well, you could have stayed going. I'd have taken them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no. And I was glad that you got to talk about more. You actually just kept it going with sort of the end of the series, because that was what I wanted to talk to you about. The idea that the team would have changed and all of that.
Who cares? I love it.
Yeah. Now there's just one bit of news that we have that's separate from all this that I wanted to make sure that we got in, is that we have a premiere date for WandaVision, and WandaVision will premiere on January 15th. So anyway, that's January 15th, and we'll talk more about that in the near future. You can see that Michael is at I Hate Michael Shirley. See, now you're the one having a little bit of a technical problem. There's like this roar that I'm hearing.
Oh no!
Yeah, I think that's the Katy Perry roar. In any case, Cami Egan is thoughts on WandaVision moving to January. Look, we thought it was going to premiere on Christmas. It's only about 3 weeks, so we'll be fine with it. Daniel Drew says you always have the best interviews. Thank you, I appreciate that. Great show as always, and Rock enjoyed seeing Eric and Julia again. Eric and Julia, so that was fun. Michael, I'm just wondering. Yeah, it's a little bit of a technical issue, but see, that's what the lesson learned there is. We should end the show at an hour, because we didn't start having problems until we went to like an hour and 10 minutes. So that's basically technology conspiring against us. In any case, we'll talk more about WandaVision next week. So you took the earpiece out, Michael? Yeah. So we will definitely talk about WandaVision more next week. And we'll have plenty of other things to talk about too. At least I like to think we will. Yeah. So I can't even disconnect I can't reconnect your mics. This is the beauty of it. This is why we do it live instead of recording it, because it gets to be more fun than all of this. In any case, thanks to everybody in the chat. You guys had great questions and feedback. We always appreciate that. It was a lot of fun to get to talk X-Men the Animated Series. And as always, as the great Stan Lee would say, Excelsior!